Hello, 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 hello from a very snowy Paris. That should be bonjour. Bonjour, bonjour from a very snowy Paris. Yes, it's snowing today. More on that later. You're listening to the Earful Tower. If this is the first time you've ever listened to the Earful Tower, welcome. You've come in at Season 3, Episode 2, so you've got a lot to catch up on. But you're probably wondering what the show is. It's me, Oliver G., your host, trying to figure out France with the help of guests who know best. If you've been here from the start, that's like 52 episodes now. Welcome back. Today, we've got an episode all about Emmanuel Macron, or Macron if you prefer, the president of France. And this is all according to the man who's written the first book in English about him, Adam Plowright. So this guy Adam, I met him in a bar a couple of months ago. We got talking about Macron. He was telling me how he followed him around for a whole year on the presidential campaign trail. And I was like, well, that is an interesting story. Come on my show. And he said yes. So that's what you're about to hear. For the large part of the show today. He talks about the Macron handshake, which is a bit different to Donald Trump's. He talks about Macron's fascinating rise to power. And he also talks about how Adam dreams about Macron after spending so much time with him. I thought that was pretty funny. Adam also gives us a few tips on how to become successful. So if you're listening and you're thinking, I want to be a president, then you might just find some secrets here that'll help you get to the top. But before we get into that, the book is called The French Exception, Emmanuel Macron, The Extraordinary Rise and Risk. I hope you enjoy this episode. But before we get into it, I want to say a huge thanks to the 72 people who've subscribed on Patreon, also known as Patreon, and I'm still not sure which pronunciation is correct, but I hope you guys are all enjoying the bonus content that I've put back there. And the big announcement is that your sponsorship has allowed me to buy a piece of equipment called it's called a gimbal, but it's essentially it's a stabilizer, which means that when you're walking around doing a live Facebook video, like I've started doing, it won't be bouncing all over the place. I also call this thing a de-wobblifier, but I don't think that's the official name for it. But anyway, if you're a Facebook follower, you'll see I've been down at the flooding river, the Seine River, taking some Facebook live videos, and they're kind of worth checking out. But what the big news is today, as I said before, is that it's snowing in Paris, and I was down at the Seine today by myself just taking some pictures, and I thought, how weird is it that we've got snow coming down onto a flooded river? I was thinking, it can't be so often that happens in this city. I mean, certainly, geez, it's probably like once every couple of years, once every 10 years or something, that kind of thing happens. So I took some pictures, put them on Instagram, the Earful Tower. Go check that out while you're clicking around listening to this episode. And speaking of which, make sure you hang around at the very end because we've got a new voice on the show today. It's a tour guide, a Canadian tour guide. Her name is April Pett, and she runs the April in Paris tours. And due to a hilarious miscommunication, I asked her to come in with a story about Macron, but she came in with a story about macarons, the sweet meringue-based confection. Anyway, let's get into the show.
One man, one country, one red scooter. Here's the Earful Tower with Oliver G.
Adam Plowright, how you doing?
Oliver.
Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
Still out of breath? You are a little bit?
I don't know how many of your listeners know about your radio
They've
studio.
heard about it.
Right.
6 flights. I say 7 flights. Some listeners have told me some guests have said it was.
I lost count. It was endless.
But you're all right now, right? So tell me, for people who've never heard of you, you're the author of The French Exception.
I am.
This is a book about one man.
Emmanuel Macron.
Yes.
That's right. It's my book which came out in September in the UK, and then it's sort of being released gradually all around the world.
Right.
And it's coming to America in the spring, and it tells the story of, the subheading is The Extraordinary Rise and Risk, which is, so it tells basically the story of Emmanuel Macron and how he came from almost nothing to become the president of one of the world's great powers.
Great. So this is something, this whole show is about, if you're listening here, you've never heard it before, the whole show is about figuring out France. And I thought, let's take it to the top and let's figure out how this country works. And we're also going to talk a little bit about Paris and a bit about you. But I figured who better to ask about Emmanuel Macron than the man who's essentially, as I understand, you followed him around for like a year?
I did. I followed him. Well, I started covering the French election campaign, which started in the end of 2016, and then right up to, I'm still following him now, obviously. But
when you say following, you're not just walking after him down the road. You're in the...
I'm not. I'm in his, I go to his events. I listen to his speeches. I've probably read more interviews of Emmanuel Macron than anyone, I suspect, having written the book. And so he's my I don't know, he's sort of an object of fascination, really. So I spend my time thinking and sometimes dreaming about him.
Oh, really? Have you dreamt about him? I wonder if he's dreamt
All the
about
time.
you.
I doubt it.
Wow.
But, this is the weird thing about being someone's biographer. They
Yeah.
sort of, they invade your headspace.
Okay, so this is something that we're going to get chatting about. And I've said to Adam before he came in that we're going to do it like a kind of idiot's guide, because from my perspective, there's a lot of interesting stuff about this man. I mean, just touching on it, we know that he's got a relationship with his former teacher, which is something we're going to talk about.
He's married to. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I toned it down a bit there. But like I said, I don't know a lot about this stuff either. But we're going to talk about, and then we're going to touch on Paris and yourself and your life here towards the end.
Sure.
But first, why could you sum up why he's so interesting? Aside from politics, what is it about this guy that fascinates you and other people?
I'll start with kind of what it fascinated me, and then I'll give you the short story of Emmanuel Macron's life. But I mean, for me, the big moment was January last year, and I was at a rally in Western France. It was tipping down with rain, it was freezing cold, and I was stood outside a sports centre in a little town called Quimper, and there was literally hundreds of people queuing outside the sports centre to listen to Emmanuel Macron. And at that stage, he was he was kind of in the presidential race, but nobody was taking him too seriously. But it was quite obvious from being there was just a huge amount of excitement about who this man was and what he could potentially achieve. And then I went in and listened to him many times and saw him kind of speaking in this room. And he was really kind of, at that point, he was starting to become, you could see that he was taking on the sort of persona of this very serious presidential candidate. And the first thing that struck me was he was, at that time, he was 39. At that time, I was 37. And
I was going to bring that up. Like, you're so similar in ages.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a look at him. You're taking him in.
So I had, so I was looking at him, how do you, I'm sat here as a journalist, and how do you get to sort of his position at age 39
and
where you're running for France?
You've got 2 years to work on it.
Exactly, yeah. And that's a terrible thing about Emmanuel Macron. For anyone sort of our age, is, he makes you feel like a massive underachiever.
Yeah, I know, right?
So anyway, so that was for me, that was a starting point of, how has he got there? And then, the short story of Emmanuel Macron's life, which I obviously recount in much more detail in the book, is, he's now age 40. He's been a philosopher's assistant. He's been an investment banker. He's been a very senior civil servant. He then became economy minister in 2015, which is really the first time anybody had heard of him. Up until that point, he'd sort of had this career that was either in banking or in the civil service, and he suddenly became a very prominent economy minister. And then about a year later, just over a year later, he starts thinking about the presidential election in 2017, which is pretty extraordinary.
Which is a meteoric jump from just,
from literally nothing, from somebody with no, public profile whatsoever, to wanting to run for president. And then he launches his bid at the end of 2016, and he's then elected in May 2017, and he is the man we see before us now.
The youngest ever president the country.
The youngest ever president, the youngest leader of France since Napoleon.
Right.
So he's very
And you've just followed him around. Like, if you were walking down the street right now, Rue Lafayette, and he's crossing paths with you, what would he talk to you, or was he?
Yeah, he knows who I am. I mean, he's like this. Generally with the media, he likes to sort of keep people at a distance, and he's been very clear that he a lot of his presidency is based on not being who his predecessor was, which was François Hollande, which is a man that he spoke to. And François Hollande was very sort of famed for inviting journalists in. He would sort of chat and gossip, and he'd have very almost sort of friendships.
Didn't
with a lot
some
of
the journalists betray him and write some book?
They did, yeah. He had something like 60 dinners with a couple of journalists from Le Monde newspapers, and it was all meant to be off the record and was going to be part of this book that was going to be published afterwards.
Oh, François.
Poor old François, and he got betrayed. He got betrayed by so many people along the way, but particularly these two journalists. He wrote a book which was around the time he had a 4% approval rating.
Oh my!
And that was linked partly to this book, which kind of blew the lid on his whole presidency. So Macron kind of sees him as a model and a sort of an example of what not to do. So as a consequence, he very much keeps his distance. So he knew that I was working on the book. We spoke about it quite a few times. And
he speak in English?
We spoke in French when we spoke about it. And he didn't stop people talking to me, which was great. And I obviously needed friends and colleagues and people, his old teachers and people like this. I needed them to talk to me about what he was like. So he
sort of gave his blessing to them, or
so
to you?
As far as I understand, there was nobody who contacted him and said, "Can I speak to Adam Plowright?" And he said, "No, please don't." Yeah. So he was good in that respect, that he did collaborate to a certain
extent. Do you think? I've read a few things about Mr. Macron, and I find him fascinating. Like, I'm just from a distance, especially because he sort of seems so distant and so there's just so much going on with him. Like, it feels like if I heard that he was making puns in Greek with his mates, it would be totally believable. You know, like you hear these stories. So I want to know, when you're hanging out with him or when you're following him around, does that sort of sense of him being, a whole different planet, right? Does that come across, or is it just like the media sort of painted this picture of him? Or
no, I think that's definitely a part of his personality. I mean, he's somebody that's there's no doubting that he is extraordinarily well read and well versed, particularly mostly in French culture, but also his sort of general culture is extremely developed. I mean, he was he's someone who's gone through the top universities in France. He's somebody who, as I said before, has been an assistant to a philosopher.
What does that even mean, being an assistant to a philosopher?
He helped him. So this is Paul Ricoeur. This was he was just he was just finishing off his university actually, and there's Paul Ricoeur who's now died. He died a few years ago. Who's sort of part of the same generation as Jean-Paul Sartre, of kind of of those. That generation of philosophers who was looking for somebody to help him on what ended up being his last book. Right. And there was a professor who had taught Emmanuel Macron who sort of said, I've got this just fantastic student and he'd be perfect for you. So Macron goes off and works for Ricoeur for just over a year and helps him with this book. And he's actually quite important in opening up a whole network of people to Macron. A lot of sort of left-wing intellectuals, which then going on, which helped Macron as he makes his bid for power later on. So he was a building block.
And is it true, I've heard this, when you shake his hand and you look in his eye?
Oh, the handshake's incredible, yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah,
talk me through it. Give me an imitation.
Well, he has this...
Okay, let's do it.
He'll do this.
Okay, so you're holding my arm with your left hand.
It's a double handshake.
Yeah,
so
double.
It's the first one is a sort of the classic
triple pump, firm
he'll
grip.
Then it's firm. It's there's then the other hand comes around and we'll
that's
we'll
like a control thing, hey?
Yeah. And then he'll sometimes do that, and then he'll do a sort of
the buddy
do a pat, and he does a lot of patting, and he has this, he does have this very clear ability to sort of slightly mesmerize and charm people, and part of that is he has very blue kind of piercing eyes. As well.
I might start dreaming about him now.
I know.
But it sounds kind of hypnotizing, and I mean,
people talk about that. I mean, I think that's definitely. It's like some people. The other side of it is a lot of people find him. They can find it quite false because you can then come across as.
Hey, we're not just here to promote him. I mean, what are the critics say about?
So I was saying that there is two sides of it, because sometimes it falls flat because people can sort of see him as this Tony Blair is somebody that he's often compared to, and Tony Blair had that as well. He sort of he had the nickname later on as kind of phony Tony because he was so intent on trying to seduce you in the first sort of meeting that he would then would sometimes go so far. But anyway, Macron definitely has that.
What about a lot of people listening are probably in America and they're probably thinking about their own president, which we don't need to comment on.
Macron had a very famous handshake with him.
That's what I was going to bring up, because Donald Trump's famous for his handshakes.
This is true. The power handshake, the power grab.
To me, it doesn't sound as enjoyable as Macron sounds. What you've just demonstrated. But what happened when the two met?
Well, their first meeting was in. This is one of Macron's first kind of big events on the international stage. He was in Brussels and NATO, and Trump kind of went to meet him. It was a one-on-one. And Trump obviously has this power lunge where he pulls, he really pulls the person before him. It's very much kind of
the
him.
Wrist dislocator, I reckon.
Exactly, showing him as he is the alpha male. But anyway, but Macron, who's this physically obviously much smaller, slightly puny man in comparison to Trump, was prepared for Trump's handshake, and absolutely gripped him, and you can see him sort of tensing up, and the knuckles sort of almost go white, and he crunches Trump's hand.
Wow!
In a very kind of obvious way. And there was this big, this big conversation afterwards. And Macron actually came out and gave an interview and said, "Look, it was deliberate. I wanted to show that I might be ahead of sort of centrist liberal." 39-year-old, but I'm not going to be mucked around by, or intimidated by people like Trump or people like Putin or people like, the Turkish president, Erdogan. So it was a very deliberate thing from him of look, I mean business, and that means sort of serious handshakes.
Right. I wonder if when you were making this book, does the handshake feature in the book?
Yeah, it features as kind of part of his, part of what is important about Macron, which is how he's managed to get where he is, which is about this, these sort of, way that he pulls people in and mesmerizes them, which he does. Yeah. A lot of older people. That's the interesting thing about Macron too, is that throughout his career, often had relationships with people kind of several generations older than him, and of course his wife, who is
which we're about
the first
to talk
one
about.
of that. And she was his school teacher. He met her in sort of seduced her at school as a pupil, as kind of a 15, 16-year-old. She at the time was 40-year-old. 3 kids, anyway, so they start their relationship. But she's not the only one. There are sort of various other people throughout his life.
Even the philosopher.
The philosopher is one of them.
His grandmother.
His grandmother, who was extremely important.
I was reading about that.
Yeah, and there's another guy who's a very wealthy businessman who sort of takes him on as almost a bit of a protege, and who again he forms this kind of almost father-son relationship with.
So what I'm thinking at the same time is the guide to becoming successful so far: good handshake, befriend the elderly, marry them possibly.
You know, don't sleep. That's another thing about Macron.
He doesn't sleep.
He doesn't really sleep.
That's what I was going to ask you before. Is there anything that intrigued you or took you by surprise by hanging out with him?
He sleeps around kind of 3-4 hours a night, and has always done that, and seems to be able to.
No, we'll see. I can't do that. I'll never be able to. No, 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
How do the journalists?
I can maybe do it for 1 or 2 nights. Or when I was writing my book, I did it on for quite a few nights in succession.
So how do the journalists keep up with him?
Well, it's not so much with his. It's not so much. The journalist is one thing, but it's also the people in his cabinet and the ministers. I mean, people. You hear people talking about getting text messages at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then he's up again working at 5 or something like that. So
crazy.
He has pretty pretty crazy working hours. So that's definitely. I'd say don't sleep. That's another good thing. To succeed.
You know who else didn't sleep? Houseman.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm reading a book that features on him at the moment, and he said they all said, "How are you so prolific with all your work?" And he said, "Well, there's a lot of time between 6 a.m. and I don't know, midnight. And don't forget there are 52 Sundays every year," he said.
Really?
So that's how
Margaret Thatcher didn't sleep much either.
Yeah, there's a pattern.
There is definitely a pattern.
You know,
the other thing that makes it, that talking about kind of, if you were, how do you design a kind of, perfectly successful, leader or someone who's going to go far. I mean, as I said, all those things that you listed, but he doesn't sleep and he doesn't have children for a start, which is I think is probably a quite an advantage in
now listen,
in politics and the career he's had.
You just reminded me of something. The question a lot of people have asked about Macron: could he be gay?
Well, this was something that came up, constantly throughout the campaign, and he kind of initially ignored it. And there are all these rumours, and I'm sure you heard them, Oliver, as all of us journalists, and frankly,
that's right. It was kind of swirling around journalist circles and like a known secret. But no one wrote anything about it because
this is right, and literally, I remember that period of around towards the end of 2016. You go for dinner with somebody, and it was always like, "Oh, so come on, Macron, is he gay?"
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I can't remember the exact date. It was probably like January or February. And one of his, I spoke to someone in his team about this, and he has a spokeswoman called Sibet, and she was in a hairdresser's in
Sibet
Ndai, who is the
not
daughter
Betsy.
of
Is that Verlan for Betsy?
No. She's Senegalese origin.
Okay, cool.
So she was in an Afro hairdresser's in Paris.
Yeah.
And the television's on, and Macron's on the screen, and a hairdresser goes, "Oh, Macron, we can't, I think he's great, but France isn't ready to to vote for a gay president."
Sure.
And she's kind of listening to this, and obviously the hairdresser had no idea who she was. And at that point, apparently, it was sort of, it was a bit of a light bulb moment. They suddenly went, "God, everybody is talking about this. Like, we need to do something about addressing this. Otherwise, this could kind of, seriously damage our campaign." So he'd kind of alluded to it in an interview in around November, December, and obviously denied it. And he then slipped it into a speech in Paris, and he goes, he basically said, "If you've heard these rumors about me, apparently, going around and having affairs," and there was a guy who works for French public radio that he was meant to have been having an affair with, which is all rumors. This is all rubbish. Don't believe a word of it. It's people with the stuff they put around.
No one believes a word they hear on this show anyway.
Right. So he addressed it straight on. This was very widely written about and commented on at the time, and it killed the speculation pretty much.
So what did he say? He said, "If you heard the rumors."
He said it's all complete false, and I'm a happily married and committed man to my wife. Now, I mean, I interviewed lots of friends who've known him sort of from his time as a student, far before he entered into politics. People who knew him at the time in his school, and everybody at that stage talks about Brigitte isn't some sort of new invention. She's somebody that he's been in a relationship with since he was 16.
Yeah, right.
And his time as a student when presumably if he had been gay and wanted to be going out and
people would know about
exploring
it. I mean,
that life, then
for that.
people would know about that, and he had every opportunity. He's had a relationship. He's been in a very serious relationship with Brigitte, really from that time through. So it's, I understand that people might question how it's possible that I think that says a lot more about our society, that we find it impossible to believe that a 40-year-old, fairly handsome man could be satisfied and properly in love with a 64-year-old woman. And what's
does
interesting
it say a lot
is,
about our society, French society, or the world? Who was talking mostly about?
I think it's generally. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump and Melania, if you look at their age gap, is almost the same. I mean, nobody finds that difficult to understand, and the age gap is reversed, obviously, in France's first couple, and yet we find it collectively, and I think this was something that was the reason there were so many rumours, and the reason this issue has been spoken about as much as it has. Find that very difficult to believe. I mean, having somebody who's worked on it, has taken a huge amount of interest, have found absolutely zero evidence that that's the case. You
know what could have stopped your book from ever happening? I once almost knocked him over on a Velib.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
I was on the Place de la République, right in the centre, and it was right after the big terror attacks.
Right.
And he was putting a wreath down at the statue of Marianne when he was just the economy minister.
Yeah.
And I was, sometimes some of us on Velibs, sometimes we ride on the
Velib
squares.
riders are known for being bad cyclists.
Even though there were lots of pedestrians and it was raining, I had my head down. And the crowd parted, and I saw a gap to go through, and I came right up next to him. And then I saw all the cameras and everything around, and I looked at him, and I think that's when my mesmerization started with this guy.
Did he pull you in? It's like that snake in the Jungle Book,
the
one with the whirly eyes.
It's funny you say that, because I was thinking about that this morning when it comes to Macron. And then I walked my bike away, and but luckily I didn't hit him.
Did he glare or smile?
No, he gave me a knowing smile, I think.
Right, okay.
I think sort of almost, I've been hypnotized before once, and it felt a bit like that again. But what about...
I think maybe we might be overdoing Macron's powers.
I think it's interesting. I think it's like one of the presidents in the world that are actually, the person is very interesting aside from talking about their politics or how they govern or anything.
No, I think he's interesting for a number of ways. I mean, he's interesting as you mentioned, as an individual. He's interesting politically in terms of what he represents in France, and then obviously internationally. He's a kind of a rarity now.
Yeah, right. That's why. I mean, it makes good fodder for a book, I imagine.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. But let's talk about this book for a second, and about you. Your English sounds like an English accent to me.
I am English.
Where are you from?
I'm from near Sheffield originally.
Sheffield,
north of England.
Yeah. North. I was going to guess south.
No.
Okay, so you're from northern-ish England.
I don't sound like from Sheffield.
No, you don't sound like a northerner.
I've been too long living in the south afterwards. So.
And then how did it end up that you're in France writing about politics, speaking such good French? Suspiciously good French. Now I work for. I studied French all the way through school, university, so forth, and then I started working for my current employer about 12 years ago, which is Agence France Presse, which is the national French news agency, also known as AFP,
AKA
AFP,
AKA AFP. Yeah. And you're Australian, right?
That's right. It
sometimes gets confused as the Australian Federal Police.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
It can be really funny at conferences sometimes when people think you're a policeman.
Oh, wow. Or when people call you up to report a stolen dingo or something. Yeah.
Happens occasionally. So I've worked for AFP and I've kind of moved around a bit with them through Brussels, obviously based in Paris and Delhi, and then I'm now back in Paris, which is the headquarters for.
And they said, Adam Plowright, follow Macron.
So as part of the team that was following Macron, and then I kind of took it upon following the French election, and then I kind of specialised in following Macron because I could see the interest there, and then it at some point kind of realised that I had enough material and he was interesting enough really to make a book. So,
and then do you know if he's read it?
He has had he's had copies. I'm angling for some more access to him, and so I'm waiting to hear exactly what he thought of the book.
But
so
he's reading every day, as I understand. Like
he reads a huge amount, and on himself. So
he probably speed reads as well. You know what? Brigitte's probably read it because don't they read everything about each other or something? I read once.
I'm not sure. I haven't heard that. Possibly, right?
Like at the end of the day, I read once that they just sit down over a cup of tea and talk about everything they heard about the other person that day.
Really? Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I wonder where I got that from.
I know she goes out and she'll go around and talk to people. Sort of, she slips out of the Elysee sometimes in disguise and goes around talking to people about him and stuff, which is quite.
What does that mean? Talk like goes into the.
Well, she sort of goes intelligence gathering, on.
She goes into the barber shop in the Afro.
Maybe finding out. So what do you think of Emmanuel Macron? I mean, she describes it as just sort of wandering around talking to people. I bumped into her actually on the. I was cycling home and I didn't really run. I didn't really run over her, but I did. I cycled past her and stopped to say hello. And she was sort of going around. She was down by the banks of the river, and I was just sort of stopping, talking to people in bars and stuff. So
does she speak good English as well?
I don't think her English is as good as his.
Because his is really good, but with an accent.
He does have an accent, and sort of a slight lisp actually when he speaks English, which is fun. I don't know if you've heard, but he has for a French president, he has.
I mean,
remarkably good English.
Well, the last couple haven't been able to speak any English, right?
No, Sarkozy and Hollande neither of them spoke good English. So.
Well, it is. Okay, well, I want to do a little bit of talk about Paris because let's be honest.
Let's talk Paris.
Let's be honest, the real guest of this show is Paris every week, in and out. So what I wanted to know is, are there touristy kind of sites related to, the politics and stuff? Like the Élysée Palace. Mm-hmm. That's not a palace like the Palace of Versailles that you can go walk around, or is it?
You get to go in the Élysée only one day a year, unfortunately, which is when the day they open up all the public buildings, and you can go around and have a little
patrimony
sniff
day.
Around his sniff around. Probably not in the presidential.
Although there's an enormous
suite,
queue, lining up.
There is a huge queue, unfortunately. Yeah. So you can't go in there. But there's that and that. Well, you can go in the Assemblée, the lower parliament, and the Senate as well. If you're for anyone sort of politics buffs who want really to see where they sit in their Republican glory, which looks like royal palaces.
Just waltz in and have a look at it.
Only on these days.
Those days. Oh.
Yeah, so that's unfortunately. But in terms of kind of political tourism, what you would.
Yeah, political tourism. That's what I want to leave it on. Is there one political tourism site that you can recommend for people who are into politics and going to be kicking around in Paris?
No, in terms of Macron, it says what you would do. I mean, he went to school up near the Panthéon, just around the back around there is the Henri IV, which is one of the most sort of prestigious secondary schools in the capital, and it's just opposite the Panthéon. Lovely little area there. He was around there.
Or as a lot of people would call it, the Pantheon.
The Pantheon. Yeah, that's right.
You're saying it very properly there.
Sorry, Pantheon it is. And then there's all around the sort of left bank area around Saint-Germain, which is where he was a student, and we sort of hang out with his friends around there, which is Sciences Po, which is the main. The big university around there near the Sorbonne. What else would you do on a?
I think that's a good tip to get started on. I want to go in on those patrimony days and check out some of these things, but I went past the enormous line to get in.
To get in the Élysée is incredible. Yeah, I went in the Senate one year, which is really nice.
How often are you in the Élysée?
Fairly often.
Are you allowed to take pictures?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe you send me a picture and we'll put it up on the website.
Okay, I can send you one of the. It has an amazing sort of gravel courtyard. It has the most incredibly raked, sort of impeccable gravel courtyard.
What are they called? Bonsai Zen garden kind of
thing. It's like that, yeah.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to seeing that picture. You have been Adam Plowright. Your book, The French Exception, The Extraordinary Rise and Risk, Emmanuel Macron we're talking about here. And thanks for being a guest on the Earful Tower.
It's been a pleasure. I've got to go down your stairs now.
Yeah, good luck. Hope your shoes are dry. It could be slippy.
All right.
Best of luck there. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks very much.
You're listening to the Earful Tower podcast.
April Pet.
Hello.
From April in Paris Tours.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. So I've just had an interesting conversation, and I've asked you to come in with a story about Mr. Macron.
But
Oliver...
Oliver...
Macron, the president.
The president?
Yeah.
But you texted me about macaron,
no.
The pastry.
Good joke. No, I texted you about the president.
Should I show you this text message?
Did I actually text you macaron? Show us?
Macaron. Yeah.
Okay.
Take a look there.
Okay. That's an autocorrect. I've been talking about the president of France for half an hour with Adam Plowright.
All right. So...
that's a bit awkward.
Yeah. Well,
should we redo this, or can you do a story about...
do you want me to do a quick story about the president of France? Or?
If you've prepared one about macarons, and because I'm an autocorrect disaster, we can do that.
Okay.
But
then why don't maybe in a future episode you can talk to a pastry chef about macaron, and then I'll come in and talk about macaron.
Like it.
Maybe
That's exactly what we'll do. Okay.
we can switch it up.
But hey, a lot of people listening like to find things in Paris, so surely there's something about macaron that you can. Now I'm confusing myself.
Yeah,
Macron.
You're
okay.
confusing
We're doing
me too.
What's a macaroon?
A macaroon. Well, a macaroon.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference. Let's
start at the very beginning.
Okay, so
Macron is the president. That much I know.
Macron is the president, Emmanuel. A macaron is a delicate little French pastry.
Yeah.
That's kind of looks like a hamburger. Okay,
and
it's
a
made
really
with,
small hamburger. Yeah,
made with almond paste.
Yeah.
And very flavorful these
Gotcha.
days.
Yeah.
And then a macaroon is American version.
Okay.
Not version, but it's kind of like a coconut cookie that's dipped in chocolate.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
But let's stick with macarons then.
Macaron.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
let's do your story on macarons.
Okay, because actually, macaron. People are always saying, April, what should I get to bring back home after my time in Paris? What is the hot thing on the shopping list?
And you say Earful Tower tote bag, and they go, I've got an Earful Tower tote bag.
Most of them have it already, and they just need things to put in
they want
to bring home.
Okay.
And so, macaron, that's what everybody kind of wants to taste and buy and bring back as souvenirs, even for themselves. I bet half of them don't make it even back to their home countries because they get into them on the plane.
Sure.
Now,
don't tell me you brought macarons in today to the studio. Don't tell me. That's a no. Okay.
Well, we'll have to take a peek into my Earful Tower tote bag.
Oh my Lord.
Once we're done here.
Okay, go on then. Okay, macarons.
Okay.
So you're telling people to take them home. They're obviously tasty.
They're tasty.
Where are we meant to be buying them from?
Well, my favorite place in Paris to buy a macaron is Pierre Hermé.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, you need to check it out. He's just opened a huge store.
Who's he? Is that the man? Pierre Hermé?
It's the pastry chef.
Right.
Yeah, who does these marvelous, delicious little creations, and he's just opened up a shop on the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, number 86. And his flavors are absolutely stunning. When macarons were first being baked, they were just plain.
Right.
They were served without any flavors or fillings and just made of almond paste, basically.
And then Pierre Hermé came into the room.
Well, he's not the one who actually started adding the colors and flavors, but these days he's like very cutting edge because he is adding different ganache and filling between
The hell is a ganache?
Ganache is like a jam, okay?
Yep.
It's the filling to the macaron. So he fills the hamburger buns basically with the ganache, but he also is mixing away from the traditional sweet flavors, but he's putting a spin on it, mixing sweet and savory flavors.
Right.
Over the holidays, I just had a caviar and green walnut
Caviar
flavor.
and green walnut. I would pair them.
Yeah,
I'd pair them.
And he also did a fig and foie gras macaron, which is pretty awesome. Yeah. Tantalizing for the taste buds.
So I've never bought macarons in Paris.
Okay.
And if I was buying them as a tourist, do they give them in little boxes of 6 or something?
Yeah, you can buy them in boxes. Well, when you buy at least 6, you can get a decorative box too, which is always nice as a keepsake afterwards. Like my friend is a teacher, and so she puts like her pencils and pens for class in her.
Hang on, like a wooden box?
Yeah,
really?
or
Cool.
tin box.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's cool because I was thinking they're quite fragile macarons.
So they're great to transport like that. But you can always just go in and just buy one, and they'll serve it to you on a nice little napkin, and you can just,
So is
enjoy
that
it
is
in
that
the
a
street.
recommended thing you think to take someone to go and buy a macaron?
Oh, 100%.
I've never done that before. I've got to start doing that.
Yeah. Actually, for my friend who lives in Australia, she loves passion fruit, and Pierre Hermé did a chocolate and passion. Well, I believe he still does. And for her birthday, I sent her one, like a mega size one, okay?
Right.
And I wrapped it in all this bubble wrap, and I posted it to her in Australia, and it got there in one piece. It was amazing. Yeah, she was so happy. So
that's nice.
Yeah, but that's kind of like the hot thing to buy these days.
Got it. Okay, good tip, and thanks for the language fix up.
Oh, my pleasure.
You've been April in Paris. From April in Paris Tours.
Yes.
Book a tour. She's like, you hear how she sent the passion fruit to her friend? She's going to be your friend in Paris.
I am.
Book a tour with her. Tell her the Earful Tower
me.
sent you, and she'll look after you and give you a tote bag as well. The tote bag to take your
macarons.
Yeah.
Back in.
Perfect for macaron. I'm going to get so confused. I hope I never meet the president. I'll call him Mr. Macaron.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see you next time, April.
Okay,
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Oliver.
And good luck with your macaron hunting.
Merci. À bientôt.
So there you have it. That was April Pet, following on from Adam Plowright. So that book again, The French Exception, Emmanuel Macron, The Extraordinary Rise and Risk, and the tours were with April in Paris. So all the links to the things we mentioned are going to be on the show notes. But before we leave, I'll give you a few things to think about here. If you're in Paris, The lads at the Peloton coffee shop down in the Marais have just agreed today, actually, to start storing my tote bags. So get in there for a coffee, delicious coffee, and a glorious tote bag. Those of you who've already bought them, I just want to say a big thanks for the support. And once again, if you value this show, please consider jumping in on Patreon. People who are in there say it's a laugh and a half. That's what they say. That's not what I say. I think it's pretty fun too, but I wouldn't use the words laugh and a half. But an enormous hello to a few of you guys, a few of you patrons, I think you're called patrons, who I've met up with recently in Paris. So I'm looking at you, Samantha and Demetrios, who claim to be my biggest fans in Cleveland. Nice to meet you guys. Looking at you, Jess from Australia, and I'm also looking at you, Gretchen from the US. It's been really fun meeting you guys. And little known fact, everywhere we met up were places in the guidebook, The Ultimate Guide to Paris, which is also hidden away on Patreon for you supporters. I want to say as well, look, I mean, I get it. If you got no money to spare and you can't sign up on Patreon, that's fine. But if you want to do something to help the show, what you could consider is leaving a review on iTunes. And like Clotilde said last week in the Markets episode, it's good if I read out one of those reviews now and then. So here's one that someone left during the off-season. Are you ready? Parisian and playful, 5 stars from The Simply Luxurious Life, which is another podcast actually in the States, a good one. Here's what she said. The Earful Tower is exactly what I've been looking for when it comes to a Parisian podcast. Informative, current, unique, and playful. In other words, an absolute treat to listen to. Oliver is a winsome host. Ooh, winsome. A winsome host. She didn't say, ooh, winsome. That was me. And each episode I find myself adding somewhere new to visit the next time I return to the City of Light. So that's 5 stars straight back at you, Simply Luxurious, because I love the word winsome. Don't really know what it means, but I like it. And yeah, thanks for leaving that review, and to everyone else who's done that. What have you guys got to look forward to next week? Well, I've decided episodes are always going to come out on Mondays, so that's one thing to look forward to. And I've already recorded the one for next Monday. Who have we got? Have you ever heard of Janine Marsh? No? She's the woman behind the hit website The Good Life France, and she's just written a book called My Good Life in France. So yeah, she's a British expat who's not living in Paris. She's actually living up in the north of France, and we had a good conversation about the differences between Paris and France, and whether France is Paris, Paris is France, and we had a good old laugh talking about, well, her good life. So get ready for that one on Monday. In the meantime, there's going to be a bunch more live videos. There's going to be a bunch more stuff on Facebook, even more blog posts. And my plan is this coming weekend to do a live walk specifically for you Patreon members. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. And now's the perfect time to sign up if you want to get on that. Otherwise, you'll hear from me on Monday. See you next week.